You're listening to School Counseling Simplified, a podcast with easy-to-implement strategies for busy school counselors. Here's your host, Rachel Davis from Bright Futures Counseling.
Hey everybody, thanks for listening to another episode of School Counseling Simplified. So, you may be able to tell by the sound quality, I am actually back in the studio. The last two episodes we did, were interview style, one in person with Carla and one virtual through a Zoom call with Lauren. So those were a lot of fun, and we were able to make YouTube videos out of those. So you could see my face and see their faces and hopefully feel like you were right there in on the conversation with us. So I will be switching it up. The majority of the episodes will be just me here in the studio, but from time to time I may have on some guests in person and virtually, just as a way to switch up our content and to provide you with counseling tips and strategies from other people, not just me. But today I'm here to talk to you about small groups. So I am very passionate about small groups. They are one of my favorite parts of school counseling. I'm going to say it is my favorite part of school counseling, and it's for a few reasons. Number one is the connection piece. So I think that kids thrive in small group settings. From when I've worked with students, they love the small groups and they get so much out of them and put so much more into them than when we're in a one-on-one. So sometimes if you're meeting one-on-one with a student, it can be a little awkward at first when you're trying just to build that rapport early on. They may feel a little intimidated. It's just them and an adult. Sometimes they feel like they're in trouble. They have to come see you, leave class, and it's not always the best setting. Eventually, over time, hopefully you two can build rapport and they'll open up. I've had some wonderful individual sessions, and a lot of times the nature of the topic calls for an individual session. If someone's processing through a difficult family time or grief or something like that, that may be better to do on an individual level. But overall, for these skill-building groups, such as social skills, friendship, self-regulation, self-control, growth mindset, I love to do any of those in a group setting, and I find the kids love it too. They feel more comfortable. They open up with each other. They may have some friends in the groups. They're having fun. It's a really fun setting. And I also find that it's efficient. So remember, you may be split between two schools like I was, or we know you have so much going on with your caseload, and time management is a big part. It's a big struggle as counselors, really. So a group is a great way to see 5 kids or 7 kids in 30 minutes instead of 1 kid. So your impact and your reach is going that much further. Okay, so as I did an episode on before on guidance lessons, so your program is going to have 3 major parts, right? You have your 3 tiers. You have your tier 1 instruction that everyone's receiving. Those are your class counseling lessons. Then you have your level 2, that is your small groups. That's what we're talking about today. And that is for students who need a little extra support than that general preventative piece that you're putting out. You may have received a referral from the student themselves saying they wanted help in an area, or you may have received it from a parent or teacher. Or admin, right? So they are in that second tier, and then the third tier, the most intensive, is the individual level, and we'll talk about that next week. But today I want to talk to you about the small groups. So you may be wondering, okay, I want to do small groups, but how do I find students for these groups? So pretty simple. You may already have a laundry list of referrals that people are sending you. And you may say, I don't have enough time to see all these kids individually. Well, if you find that some are compatible, similar topics, similar needs, you can place them in a group together. Now, there are some things you want to keep in mind. Sometimes people like to do only girls in a group or only boys in a group, or maybe only 3rd graders in a group and only 5th graders in a group. So you can divide your group these ways. I find unless it's a body image or sometimes self-esteem group, or relational aggression group, those I would tend to do based on gender, just to have some conversations that may be embarrassing in front of the opposite sex, but especially if they're a little older. But for most topics, I mix boys and girls. And then age level, I think it's a little more important to keep separate. A lot of times a third grader may be intimidated if they're in a group with a fifth grader, Or vice versa, a fifth grader may think it's silly, I don't want to get pulled out of class to go hang out with a third grader and leave my friends, it's embarrassing or something. So I find that putting them together by age is usually more important than by gender. But you can do whatever you think is best for your kids. But you're going to go off those referrals. So if you see a similar need in a group, for example, a group that I do almost every year, it's a fifth grade girls relational aggression group. So this group comes to me in two ways. First off, I usually have some friendship drama and some friendship issues at this age. So the students themselves are coming to me with some problems. And sometimes their teachers or parents are coming to me with concerns based on similar issues. So I create a group for these students. Now, in these kind of groups, I like to also put in some students who I think may benefit in a preventative way. So let's say there's a girl who's friends with these students, but she's kind of on the outskirts. She's not really in the drama, but she's friends with them. Maybe include her in the group as kind of like a neutral person and to prevent future drama or relational aggression from happening. And you also sometimes want to put in some kids who are kind of a leader or a good example. So maybe someone who isn't struggling as much in this area, but could, help be an example and could help provide some suggestions for the group. So it's a little tricky when selecting those students because obviously you don't want them to miss class time if this isn't a huge need for them. But if this was a lunch bunch or something, you can kind of sell it to them too. Like, hey, why don't you join us? It's going to be fun. Some of your friends are going to be there. And then, the students obviously don't know which ones are in there based on referral and which ones are in there based on that you think they would just be like a good addition to the group as in a leadership role. So that's something to consider. But you're looking for students for your group. Now, we never want to recruit people for counseling. And it's funny because I get excited about counseling and I think everyone could benefit from it, just as I think most adults could benefit from therapy. It doesn't mean there's anything wrong with you. It means your self-improvement, right? Like, who couldn't use help on social skills or emotional regulation? I know I can always use help with these things. So anyways, I'm passionate about counseling. You probably are too. So it's easy to get at a back to school night or tell parents, hey, join this group, tell your kids to do this. We're looking for students for this. But unfortunately, counseling does have a stigma around it. And a lot of times parents are going to be reluctant for their kids to join the group. So you want to be transparent about what the group is, but you also want to be positive, and the wording can go a long way. So, for example, I like to say in my permission slips, your student or your child has been invited to join this group. This is a great opportunity for your child. Your child will learn the following skills. The teacher and I believe that this is a good fit for your student because. So we're making it look like a positive thing to kind of loosen up that negative connotation or negative stigma around it. We never want the parent to feel like we're recruiting their child because there's something wrong with them. So we don't necessarily want to go out and gather everyone for counseling, but a preventative approach is better than a reactive one. So if you're, at a back to school night or an open house, just have a little pamphlet, a get to know me brochure, have that out. I actually have a freebie, one of those for you in my free resource library, so you can go download that. And the parents can see it and read a little more and learn a little more about you. And then you could also even have some permission slips out there and just say, well, think about it. These are the services I provide, and here's a permission slip. If you want to go ahead and fill one out, we can go ahead and get something scheduled. You would be surprised how these go. So I did it at like our back to school night. I was in the cafeteria with a table set up. There were also tables for, I think, like PE and health and art, kind of specialist tables. So parents stopped by. I had some brochures, and a lot of them were interested, like, oh, I didn't even know our school had this service. Thank you. Like, I would love for my kid to go to counseling to do something like this. How can I sign up? So you may be surprised. Like I said, I have a freebie brochure for you in the free resource library, and I also have a permission slip for you in there. So as I was saying before, with some of the verbiage you want to use, you can grab that permission slip. So those are some ways that you can find students for your group. You're going to find students based on referrals and by making yourself present and showing the services you provide. This also goes back to our advocating episode. By showing parents the services you provide, they may want you to see their children. Now, how big should your group be? So it's called a small group. You want it to be small, but really it varies. I think in my internship I had like 8 or 10 kids in there, which in my opinion is way too many. I like to keep it around 5. So, because you never know, sometimes kids drop out, or if kids are absent or they're not coming, things like that. It's nice to have 5 or 6 is good just in case someone leaves. You never really want it to get down to 2 or 3, then it's not really a group. So I recommend 5 or 6, and you want to keep in mind your classroom management skills when you're selecting group sizes. So be real with yourself. Are you going to be confident to facilitate a group of that size, especially if you have 7 kindergartners who are in a self-control group, which I have done this before, and I do not recommend it. 7 kindergartners in a self-control group is a hot mess. So given the age, developmental age, topic, you want to kind of be mindful that way. 7 kindergarten boys struggling with self-control looks a lot different than 7 6th grade girls talking about body image. That group may be a little easier to run as they're more mature. So that's just something to consider. Now, scheduling your groups. This can be tricky. And I've mentioned before, we are going to have an episode all about scheduling. But basically, this is the order of events you want to follow. So you figure out who's going to be in what group. You're going to send out those permission slips to parents. And then you need to coordinate available times with the teachers. So you can ask teachers their ideal time. A lot of times this works well if it's out of instruction time. It might be easier for you that way, like a lunch bunch. Or as Lauren mentioned in our other episode, she had a group meeting before school. So I don't know if that's an option for you. Obviously, I don't want you to have to extend your contract hours when this is part of your job, but lunch bunches are a good idea, recess, snack time, or if there's another specialty time that they could miss. If they do need to miss instructional time, obviously mental health is an equal priority. How are students expected to perform well in academics if they aren't taking care of their mental health needs first? So we do want to keep that in mind. I've found in my experience, most teachers are pretty supportive and flexible. It takes some finagling. The bigger the group gets, the harder it is. But that's something you can think of when you are forming your groups. Which kids, maybe you have some kids that are in the same class, and that's going to be easier to do. You only have to communicate with like 1 or 2 teachers rather than 6 different teachers. Now, you also want to clarify how the students will be coming to you. So I'm speaking to elementary primarily here. Do you want the kids to come to your office? Are they going to remember their time? If so, how are they going to remember their time? Are they going to set a reminder on their iPad? Are they writing it in their planner? Or will their teacher remind them? That's if they're coming on their own. Or sometimes the expectation is that you will go pick them up. So how are you going to pick them up? You need to schedule in that 5 minutes, 10 minutes, I'm not sure how big your campus is, to go round them up from their classrooms. Or maybe you're going to call the classrooms. I worked at a school once where calling was super common. Like we would be calling classrooms all the time, and it oddly didn't disrupt the learning. We even had student jobs who the students would answer the phones. So they would say like, Miss Watkins' class, Sarah speaking, and you would say, hey, Sarah, can you send Jose and Michelle to come to group? And she'd be like, sure. And then they would come up. So if you are interested in doing that, then you should have a call log by your phone with the extension, which kids are in which class. That way you're not scrambling before every group because you're not going to remember. So you want to set up these systems for success. So a system for success, giving yourself enough time to physically corral all the kids and still have time to do the group. You want to schedule that in. Another system for success is having that call log right beside the phone so you know who's coming from which classroom and what that extension is. So that's just getting the kids to the group. We're not even starting the group yet, and there's already a lot to think about. Now, how long should your group be? I like to keep them 30 minutes. Now, you will take up that entire 30 minutes, especially by the time you do a sign-in sheet and group rules and a feelings check. Before you get into the meat and potatoes of your group, it may be 10 minutes. So I recommend 30 minutes. 40 would be great. But you want to remember you may have that travel time in between that you have to consider. So depending on your school schedule, you may have less time. It really just depends how they are letting you see the kids. Lunch, as I mentioned before, it's, a blessing and a curse. It stinks because then you don't usually get a lunch. You're eating with the kids, so you don't really get that adult interaction piece at lunch. But it is, again, efficient. So you're eating your lunch, the kids are eating their lunch, and you're all meeting at the same time. It adds a casualness to the group, so it feels less formal, less like a class, so kids may chat more. But you do want to keep in mind which activities you will do if you are doing a lunch bunch. So if you're planning on doing a group that has a lot of cut and paste crafts and coloring, that's probably not the best choice. But if you're doing more discussion cards and like rolling a die, something like that, then it's a little easier to do that in the lunch setting. And I found that conversations about manners and etiquette tend to come up. So that's a social skill you can teach them within the group regardless of topic. Talking with their mouth full, you get the gist. So I talked about the length of the actual group session, but the duration of the group. So I like to keep mine around 6 to 8 weeks, usually 8 weeks. There's like an introductory session, a closing session, and 6 weeks of quality group work. I find that this works well. So you're only doing it, a couple months out of the year, and then they can practice that skill in real time. You're not trying to start a group in August and have it run till March. There's no need for that. Remember, you want your counseling services to be solution focused. And then you can assess maybe after your kids graduate, maybe a few of them get referred back for a similar need and they need to go in group round 2, but with different kids. Or maybe some of them come back with a different need this time. So not to say you won't see the same students all year in different capacities, but the same group should not go that long. I also want to share a way that you can be transparent about your group sessions, how many there will be, and how long they will last with students. This is important because a lot of our kiddos function on expectations, and they like to know a schedule and a clear plan to feel comfortable, as do many adults, right? I can totally relate to that. So they like to know what's going on. My first couple years would, I kind of knew how long I was meeting with the kids, but then something would come up, and then I'd say, oh gosh, it's actually our last group today. Okay, kids, it's our last group. And they'd freak out. And they want to come back and everything. So it's better if we can kind of prime them for that when this group is going to end. So you can use a progress tracker for this. So how I like to do that is I want you to create something visual to show the kids. And then you will check off each one. So here are a few examples. This one I actually learned during my internship from the counselor I shadowed under, and it was such a cute example. I come back to it over and over again. But it was an elementary girls' friendship group, first grade. And we had an ice cream cone. She had it laminated on the wall and then Velcro on little ice cream scoops. And each time we had a session, the kids were told we're going to have 6 sessions. After each session, we put a scoop of ice cream on the cone. When the cone has 6 scoops, we know it's done. So when we're at 4 scoops, they're like, oh, we have 2 left. There were no surprises, and it was a lot easier to have closure. And the kids really functioned well off those expectations and knowing, okay, we have 1 left, 2 left, things like that. Another way you can do this, you could do it with any theme. Ice cream is just kind of generic, but you could find out what your kids like. Make it personal to them. If your kids love Pokemon, you could do Pokemon themed. You could do this on a sticker chart. You could even do simple tally marks. You don't have to make it fancy, but it is fun to kind of make it fun based on the kids' interest and things that they like. Then they're going to be more invested in it. if you've ever seen any of my small group curriculum that I create, I like to have themes for things. So one that comes to mind is my goal setting group is like a hiking theme, goal climbers. And on that one, I actually have a picture of a road map. And then each session they get like a compass or a hiking boot or a piece of the map, something like that. So you could even do like a treasure map and add little pieces of treasure. Lots of variety here. But the point is you want to keep it very visual and very transparent how long your group's going to be. That way there are no surprises for the students. Now, I mentioned earlier that you would have a group rules and feelings check and a sign-in sheet at the beginning. So I want to talk about that meat and potatoes of your group. So those are 3 things that I recommend you do every group. I have a sign-in sheet on the table. Kids come in, write their names. This is a way to easily track attendance. So hopefully there is not, but if there is a fire or an emergency, you know your kids are accounted for, they're with you. This just, backs that up, makes it clearer for everyone. And it's a good way to track who attended which session. You can look back at your sheets and say, oh, on August 15th, Marlo wasn't here. That's a good way to keep track of who is attending which sessions. So the simple sign-in sheet will do. And the kids like it. They're always wanting to sign first. They, for some reason, are like, oh, I want to go first. And then a feelings check and group rules. So your group rules you will want to establish in the first group. I like to have the kids come up with these with me, although I do kind of push the conversation. So, for example, the ones I always like to include are be kind, be respectful, participate, and confidentiality. I usually have to explain confidentiality, and then every week when we review the rules, I see if they remember what it is. It's pretty fun. But I'll say, okay, we're going to come up with some rules for our group. Who has an idea of a rule that they would like to use? And they'll raise their hand and say, no hitting. I'll say, okay, no hitting, that's a good one. That would fall under be kind or be respectful. Or they say, don't say mean things about others. Oh, good. That's be respectful, be kind. We're kind of going back to those words. Or else you'll get 20, don't do this, don't do that, don't do this. And then participate, I think, is a good one, especially with those older kids. You don't want them feeling like they're too cool to participate in the group. So reminding them that that is why they're there, is to participate. And you can hang these on the wall and refer back to them if someone's not doing something. Please remember our rule of being kind, or please don't forget our rule about participating if you want someone to join in. So keeping it positive and always referring to those rules. But again, you can come up with them on your own, but I think having the kids come up with them during the first session is a fun way for them to really be like stakeholders in the group and to feel like it's their group and you're not just using a generic set of rules that you would use with anybody. So every session, you're going to pull out your group rules and review them. And again, I'm always like in the 4th one, confidentiality, and ask if anyone remembers it. It usually takes a couple weeks, but then they can all recite, we say in here stays in here, basically. And I have a confidentiality poster hanging up that they can refer to. And I believe that confidentiality poster is a freebie in my free resource library as well. So remember to get these freebies that I'm mentioning. You go to my website and the free resource library tab at the top. Okay, so after you do your group rules, then it's a feelings check. So a feelings check is one of my favorite parts of group. It's very simple, but it's a really powerful activity. So what you do is you go around in a circle and you say how you're feeling and why that day. I always start to model and catch yourself, see if you're being honest, because a lot of times I noticed I used to say, oh, I'm happy because I'm having great leftovers for lunch today, or I'm happy because my parents are coming to town this weekend, something like that. But then sometimes it's nice if your default isn't always happy, because you want to model to the kids that other emotions are okay too, and that even you as an adult experience other unpleasant emotions. So maybe I'm feeling sad because my friend and I got into a fight. So you could say that. Then you go in order around the group. And I find it helpful to pass a little item or token to pass around so you know whose turn it is. And when that person is holding the item, no one else is talking. So we're giving them our full respect. You can refer back to your rules. Remember, kids, be respectful. It's Charla's time to talk, right? And then she's holding the item. So I like to use those, which of course this is all pre-COVID, so you want to keep it sanitary. This probably isn't a good idea right now to pass around something. But if we go back to how things were, you can use something like this. I used one of those heart hugs from IKEA, from the kids section. It's a heart-shaped pillow with arms, and the kids hug it. It's really fun. We actually had one in grad school that I loved, and then I went and bought some. When I got my first counseling job, that was my big thing. I was like, I have to get the heart hugs because I wanted them. It felt like I really had an office if I had the heart hugs. But you could pass around anything. It almost reminds me of, I don't know if we have any old cheerleaders or fans of the movie Bring It On, but they had that spirit stick they passed around. Or maybe I'm thinking Legally Blonde where they do the snap cup. One of those funny 2000s chick flicks. Similar. Anyways, I digress. Feelings check's very powerful. I really recommend that you do this at the beginning of each group and take it seriously and make sure that the students are respecting each other and really listening when they share. So those three things, the sign-in sheet, group rules, and feelings check, are happening every group. Take about 10 minutes. And then you're going to go down to the main components of your group. So I like to do an icebreaker activity. So it's fun if the icebreaker is just kind of getting everyone more comfortable and, okay, we're at group, we're with each other, let's loosen up a little bit. But it's fun if you can make it relate to the topic. So, for example, if you're doing a self-control group, it's fun to do like a freeze dance icebreaker. So you play some music and everyone can dance like crazy. And then right when you press pause, everyone has to freeze. So that's a good example of an icebreaker, just something kind of silly but still relevant to do at the beginning of the group, and then you're going to come down for the main lesson, like a little instruction. So you're going to talk about your topic, and you can show a video and discuss the video, and then you have a main activity, and that is where you're going to use like discussion cards or role play or charades, or maybe you're doing worksheets or making a collage, something tied around that. So, for example, self-control. Let's say we did that icebreaker of dancing, and then we're going to talk about self-control strategies that day. And I'm going to share some examples of self-control strategies, and maybe we watch a video clip and we're trying to identify when that person's showing self-control. That would be the lesson portion. Then the main activity portion would be role play. So maybe they're in pairs and they draw a card and they have to show an example of how they're going to act out one of the self-control strategies. So they're introduced to the material, learning the material, and then applying the material. And then I like to wrap it up with a journal. So this is a quick review where they can say what they learned during that session, how they feel that it applies to their everyday life. The journal's powerful, and I will say a word of advice is make sure that you budget in time for your journal, because there have been many times when I've been rushed and we're, we have 2 minutes, everyone get your journals out. And it's just not the same. I like when the kids feel like they have time and space to write and to reflect, you get some deeper answers there. And then something I do recommend before and after each group. So this is a piece of data collection, which we will talk about in a later episode. But I really recommend self-assessments. So they don't take long to make, and it's a great way to collect data and find out if your groups are working. So you want to assess your progress to see if it's working. If not, what can you change? So have students answer questions, self-assessment questions, before the group and after the group, like a pre-test and a post-test. So, for example, if it's the self-control group, some questions on the self-assessment could be, I know what self-control is. Yes, no, or maybe. I know I can name 3 strategies for keeping control when I'm feeling angry. Yes, no, maybe. I know who I can talk to if I'm feeling out of control. Yes, no, maybe. Something like that. Just about 10 questions. Now, I usually do these on paper, and there's a trick, kind of. It's funny. This trick was born out of not really resourcefulness, but laziness. I'm not really sure. But ideally, I wanted to have printed the before the group and then another one after the group, and then these both pieces of papers would be in the student's file. Well, it's kind of funny. I always got the first one. I'm all organized at the beginning of the group, but 6 weeks in, it's kind of a hot mess. So then I'm sure you can relate. I'm like, oh gosh, it's our last session. I never had time to print those self-assessments, and the kids are coming, and I can't leave them all in the office to go pick them up from the copier. So instead, I would just have students use their same paper, different color pen, and then just write the date at the top. So they could even see on the spot how they're growing. Or you could do front and back. Not ideal. It's probably better to print both pieces. Or even better, especially in our current climate, is doing a Google form. So Google Forms are super simple to set up. You can have the students just type in their responses or multiple choice, click yes, no, maybe, and then they would complete the same form later, and Google timestamps it so you could compare their answers. It even makes graphs and charts and everything. I found myself using the paper ones and then inputting them into Google myself, which wasted time. So if you have the students directly do it in Google Forms, then you have that data right there. So there's your little data time saver tip. Okay, so that was a lot. That was kind of a deep dive into groups. We talked about why groups are beneficial. We talked about how to find students to be in your group. We talked about how big your group should be, how to schedule your groups, how long your group should be, how to plan your groups, and finally how to assess some data in your groups, and that's by doing those self-assessments. So I hope you found this episode helpful. If you have any questions about small groups, feel free to send me a DM on Instagram. I would love to connect with you over there. Many of you have been asking me if I have digital versions of small groups, and I had to keep saying no, and it was awful, but finally they are here. So I started with Ready to Regulate, my self-regulation small group, and I completely converted it to digital, and it's really cool. I know I had shared before some tips for modifying some activities, but it wasn't ideal, just some things to get you by if you're doing virtual learning. But this is a completely digital in Google Slides group. So it's really awesome. I'm really happy with how it came together. It's not as fun, but it's almost as fun as the real thing. So you can check that out. It's in my TPT store, and I'll link to it in the show notes as well. If you're one of the people who had previously purchased the group, you get the update for free. So just go re-download it, and then you can get the new digital version along with the regular one that you already have. Or if you don't have it and you want to check it out, you get both versions. So I just added it to the existing one because no one could really predict the pandemic, and I thought that you all would appreciate it if you already bought it, that you get the new version too. So hopefully this will meet your needs if you're in person, virtual, or hybrid. All right, guys, talk to you next time.
Thanks for listening to School Counseling Simplified. You can find the links from today's episode in the show notes. If you'd like to connect with Rachel, she's on Instagram and Teachers Pay Teachers at Bright Futures Counseling. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss any episodes of School Counseling Simplified. Talk to you next week.